Thank you for tuning in to the Voice of Adventure. Today we have a very special episode to celebrate my dad's birthday this month. It's called The Adventures of Dadbad, the Sultan's Request. Dadbad was tasked by the Sultan to deliver some valuable goods across the sea, but when a strong storm and beast damaged his ship, they were forced to stop at an uninhabited island. This island wasn't uninhabited. Listen to find out what happens. The salty wind of the sea blew against Dadbad's face as he stood at the helm. The end of his white turban flapped in the breeze behind him as the waves of the open ocean lapped against the ship. Dadbad breathed deeply, having missed this feeling. Spending most of his days now behind a desk, reading contracts, ship manifests, and item requests, sailing on a clear blue day felt freeing. The worries of his company melted away as he guided the ship along. Jibei, his best helmsman in second command, walked up, ready to give Dadbad a break. Handing over control of the helm, Dadbad leaned against the railing and stared out to the open waters.
This is something I never expected.
Dadbad spoke, not really to anyone. After a brief pause, Jinbei responded.
You didn't expect the Sultan to task you with transporting his valuables? Yeah, exactly. Who would have ever thought that he would ask me, of all people, to transport so much of his wealth?
Dadbad said.
Well, I did.
Dadbad stared at Jinbei in disbelief. Dadbad hadn't come from wealth. His family had enough not to go hungry, but nothing like the wealth he had now. He had almost 100 vessels sailing throughout the world, with crews, porters, and merchants handling each ship's activities. When he started this company, it was just him and a random ship crew he hired. Over years of work and countless trips himself, he grew his company into what others have called a merchant empire. Through all of this, though, Dadbad never felt overly important or influential. He just had a job to do. Dadbad chuckled, thinking Jibei was joking.
It wasn't a joke,
Jibei said, completely serious.
The first time you met me, I had collapsed in a blizzard. I was unconscious and freezing to death. And you decided to leave the goods you were trying to sell to carry me to safety. You lost everything to save someone you didn't know. I did, but you were more important than those little trinkets I had,
Dadbad said, brushing off Jibei's compliment. Slightly annoyed at Dadbad's words, Jibei continued.
What I'm saying is, it's no surprise that the Sultan reached out to you for this job. Everyone who has ever worked with you, or for you, says you are the kindest and most reliable merchant that exists. You have created an expectation of greatness in the merchant and trade worlds. This is why the Sultan chose you above everyone else. He knew, based on what he had heard about you, that you were the right man for this job.
Jibei paused, making sure Dadbad actually received his words.
I guess you're right. I guess I'm just that amazing,
Dadbad said with a smile. Looking back to the ocean, he saw a large cluster of dark clouds on the horizon. The wind blew a strong, cool breeze against their sails, making the crew shiver for a few seconds.
Those look like storm clouds,
Jibei said.
Yeah, they are. We are in for a long night.
The storm was fast approaching, but Dadbad and his crew were hard at work. Climbing up the mast, they furled the sail and tied it up. Below deck, the crew secured all their boxes and crates with thick rope, ensuring it wouldn't move in the coming waves. Before they knew it, the sky was covered in dark clouds, and huge waves smashed against the ship. The ship rocked violently, making it hard for the crew to move around. For hours, the winds and waves beat against the ship, throwing huge waves of water all over the ship. The crew stumbled around, making sure the sail and mast stayed intact, and double-checking their goods and supplies hadn't shifted in the rocking. As they sailed deeper into the storm, thunder boomed and the sky flashed with lightning. Thanks to that, they saw a mass rise out of the ocean and approach the ship. Having sailed these oceans for years, Dadbad and Jibe knew exactly what this was: a sea serpent. A behemoth of a serpent that hunted cargo ships. His slippery, thick hide made it hard to pierce. Few ships could survive their attacks, having nothing to pierce its hides.
All hands, battle stations!
Jibe shouted. The crew scurried to grab their spears and load the cannons. They all stood on the starboard side, aimed and ready. It felt like time slowed while they waited for the attack. The winds and the waves disappeared into the background as they waited for the monster to appear. Suddenly, they heard a loud screech, and the sea serpent lunged towards the ship. The sea serpent bumped into the side, causing the crew to lose their footing. While they were struggling to get back on their feet, the serpent rose up and tried to swallow a couple of the crew. But then a loud boom sounded and one of the cannons was smoking. The sea serpent slid back, surprised by the sudden cannonball, but it looked unfazed. The crew were now on their feet, shooting and loading cannons, sending a flurry of cannonballs at the sea serpent, but they all bounced right off its hide. It looked like the sea serpent chuckled at their pathetic attempt before coming in for another strike. As it struck, the crew tried to stab it with spears, but they too had no effect. The shafts just broke as the spear hit the serpent.
Get us out of here!
Dadbad shouted.
I'm trying,
Jibe responded.
The storm keeps pushing us against it. Unless the storm dies down, I don't think we can escape.
Dadbad watched as his crew struggled to dodge the serpent. Their weapons were useless. Cannonballs just bounced off, not even leaving a mark. Spears broke before they could pierce its hide, and blades got caught in the skin, but had no effect. With no chance of escape, Dadbad unwrapped his turban and flung it towards the top of the mast. The magic turban he got on one of his previous adventures hooked itself onto the mast, and Dadbad swung up. He stood on the small wooden beam for only a second, before jumping off towards the serpent. Throwing his turban again, it latched onto a rope, and Dadbad swung onto the back of the sea serpent. He struggled to find any footing on its slippery hide, forcing him to stab his sword into the monster to keep from sliding off. Thankfully, his sword pierced the sea serpent's hide, giving him a handhold. He held on tight as the serpent began thrashing about, trying to throw him off. But no matter how hard the serpent thrashed, Dadbad didn't let go. Soon his turban was back, and he wrapped it tightly around the serpent, doing his best to suffocate it. But his turban couldn't constrict enough, and the sea serpent continued thrashing with no issue. Turning his sword, Dadbad used his turban to swing under the sea serpent. Pulling his blade behind him, he sliced through the hide, leaving a huge gash. The serpent screeched in pain and quickly swam away. Dadbad flung his turban towards the ship and landed safely aboard. A cheer rang out from the crew as they watched the serpent flee in agony. The winds and the waves still pounded against the ship, but with a real threat taken care of, they were nothing to worry about. After a few minutes of celebration, Dadbad shouted,
Everyone back to your stations. Take the engine below deck. We still have a storm to fight.
Reluctantly, they all went back to their tasks, making sure the ship would survive this storm. Many hours later, they finally passed through the storm and saw a clear blue sky above them.
How far were we taken off course?
Dadbad asked.
Not as far as I expected,
Jibe responded.
I believe the sea serpent helped us from being swept up by the storm. What a strange stroke of fate. The monster that was trying to kill us helped us a bit instead.
Just as he finished, one of the crew walked up. Captain, between the storm and the serpent attack, our ship had been damaged.
How badly damaged?
Dadbad cut in. Our hull has a few cracks, and we risk water leaking in unless we fix it. We have patched it up for now, but without docking at an island, we won't make it to our destination. The man responded. Dadbad turned to Jibe.
Are there any islands we can dock nearby? No, the only islands close by are either uninhabited or they don't have docks. Can you do the repairs if we are anchored off an island?
We won't be able to repair it completely,
but it will be enough to get us to our destination. That will work. Jibe, set course for the nearest island. Aye, aye, Captain. The crew unfurled the sail and set out for their new destination. A few days later, they heard, "Land ho!" from the crow's nest, and a small island sat in front of them. As they approached and laid anchor, they saw a shipwreck on the shore. The ship was in pieces with large holes in its hull. No chance of it sailing again. But the wreck must have been recent. Other than the holes, the ship looked in great condition. Staring out to the shipwreck, Dadbad asked, "How long do you think it will take to fix the ship?" "It should take a couple of days for basic repair. That will get us to our destination," Jibe responded. "When we get there and are actually able to dock, we will need a week or two to do more extensive repair." "Okay. Then I'm going to take a crew and salvage what we can from the shipwreck. We will also explore the island a little bit." Dadbad pulled together about a dozen men who rowed dinghies ashore. They approached the broken ship and found it in pristine condition, except for the massive holes in its hull. The group explored the ship looking for food, materials, and weapons they could take. But the ship had already been picked clean. There was nothing left except a few scraps of wood that were useless. Disappointed, Dadbad instructed the men to spread out and search the surrounding area, wondering if someone survived. After a few hours, one of the crew, Nabi, called out, "I found some supplies." Dadbad and the rest of the group hurried over to see what was found, and they saw a random assortment of food that had been thrown around, then squashed into the ground. "We did a quick look around this area, and there are some footprints leading into the island," Nabi said. "We believe that the crew members who survived the wreck were attacked here and dragged inland." "I thought this island was uninhabited. Does this mean there's a village somewhere?" Dadbad asked. "We don't know yet. The crew was clearly jumped by someone, but we don't know if they were inhabitants or pirates who snuck through the island to surprise the crew," Nabi responded. "Let's grab some supplies and follow the tracks. There's a chance that the crew could still be alive. You two." Dadbad pointed to the two skinniest in the group. "Go back to the ship and let Jibe know our plan. If we are not back by tomorrow evening, then come search for us." They nodded and took one of the dinghies back to the ship. The rest of the group grabbed their supplies and headed into the island. They walked for a while, following the tracks that led away from the beach. The sound of the ocean quickly faded as the dense foliage blocked the sound. They continued for a couple hours, the tracks leading into a small worn trail. Suddenly, a man stepped out in front of them with his bow drawn. His arrow had a small pouch tied to the front, swinging from the man's sudden movements. He spoke something that no one could understand. When they didn't respond, he shot the arrow at their feet, and a puff of smoke engulfed them. Within minutes, they felt tired and weak, and before long, they passed out. Dadbad woke up, body aching from laying on the hard ground. As his eyes adjusted, he heard an unfamiliar voice. "Nice of you to finally wake up." Looking over, he found a woman dressed in old sailor's clothes. Her long, curly brown hair was tied up behind her. Her light blue eyes studied Dadbad, then turned away disapprovingly. Without replying, he looked around and saw everyone sitting in a cell. Thick wooden bars blocked the only exit. Against the wall were the crew members he brought on this expedition, and a few others he didn't recognize. Everyone sat with their eyes downcast on the floor, except for the woman. "Where are we?" Dadbad asked, addressing the crew. Before they could speak up, the woman answered, "We are in a prison the locals made." "I didn't think anyone lived on this island." "Apparently this tribe does," the woman said coldly. Dadbad stared at the woman as her words made everyone more depressed. She never met his eyes, and after a few minutes of silence, he turned back to his crew and said, "We have to find a way out of here, Our ship is waiting, and they might get captured as well if we don't warn them."
"It's no use," the woman said. "My crew and I have been stuck here for weeks now. If there's any chance of escape, we would have found it."
"So it was your ship we found on the shore. What happened to cause that much damage?"
Dadbad asked. "We ran into pirates during a storm. Instead of letting my vessel be boarded, I drove her into this island. But the sandbar was full of boulders, and it tore my ship to pieces. But the pirates did leave after that."
"What happened to the rest of your crew?"
"We lost a couple in the shipwreck, and a few died of their wounds. After we were captured, the locals came every night and took one person with them. After the sun goes down, we hear a drumming from some sort of ceremony and screams in the distance. Then it all goes silent," the woman said, holding back a few tears for her fallen sailors. Dadbad remained silent for a few minutes to respect those who had fallen. Then he turned back to his crew.
"We need to get out of here tonight."
"Like I said, it's not possible," the woman interjected.
"I haven't tried yet, and it beats sitting around moping until they come and sacrifice the rest of us."
Dadbad walked around the cell, studying its layout. Every wall was covered with marks and divots from people trying to dig their way out. Seeing how they only ever got a few inches into the earth, it's safe to say that wasn't a possibility. Dadbad then turned his attention to the wooden bars. As expected, they were sturdy and didn't budge as he shook them. The holes between the bars were large enough for his arm, but with nothing to grab and no way to pick the lock, that wasn't useful. Plus, as he rattled the bars, 2 men who were guarding them hit his hands with the butt of their spears and aggressively motioned him back. Stepping back, he saw a few trees which were not far, bend in the strong wind, only to stand up straight again when the wind died down. Seeing this, Dadbad had an idea. It was probably a stupid idea, but it might let them escape.
"Woman, do the guards leave their posts at night?"
Dadbad asked. "Woman? My name is Adhina."
"Okay, Adhina, do the guards leave their posts at night?"
"Yes, for a few hours after they choose one of us to take away," Adhina replied.
"That is our time to escape. I have a plan to get us out of here. Then we will rescue whoever was taken and get to my ship before we're captured again."
"What happens if they find out about our escape attempt? Or if we can't rescue whoever was taken? Or if they catch us before we make it to the ship?"
"We'll improvise and figure it out at the moment,"
Dadbad responded. This didn't soothe anyone's fears, but they had no alternate ideas for how to escape. They sat silent, watching the sun slowly fall past the trees. Everyone hoped that they would not be taken, that anyone else would be taken to be sacrificed. Being taken led to almost certain death. There was no guarantee that you would be rescued. Most likely, with the whole tribe at the ceremony, there would be no chance to run in and rescue whoever was taken. Hours passed as the sun dipped low, casting a golden light into the cell. Before long, one of them would be taken. But who would be that unfortunate soul? As the sun dipped lower, tensions rose. Fear and worry filled their minds. What if Dadbad gets taken? Then there will be no chance of escape, they thought. The guard suddenly opened the door, interrupting their thoughts. No one moved. They hoped that staying still would help them be unseen. A tall, strong man walked in, with his spear and a bundle of rope. He stood in the middle of the cell and looked around at the prisoners. His gaze settled on Adhina, and with a smile on his face, he walked over and grabbed her wrist. Her crew found a bit of courage and tried to protect her, but in one swift motion he grabbed his spear and hit them across the stomach. They doubled over in pain, their faces inches from the ground. The man positioned the point of his spear at one of their necks and shook his head. Understanding the gesture, they backed away. The man quickly tied Adhina's hands and led her out of the cell. As the guards walked away with Adhina,
Her crew began pounding the ground with their fists, believing this would be the last time they would see her. Their tears puddled on the dirt floor. Dadbad spoke up.
"What are you crying for? It's not like you won't see her again."
They looked up for a second, but didn't believe there was any way to save her. Dadbad continued.
"Once the guards are far enough away, we will make our escape and go rescue her. I need you guys to be ready, because once we get her, the whole village will be after us."
They nodded in agreement, but still thought it was hopeless. 5 to 10 minutes later, they heard drums from the village.
"They must have started,"
one of Ahina's men said.
"Then this is the perfect time to escape,"
Dadbad said, standing up. He walked over to the door and pulled off his turban. Holding his turban, he stuck his hand as far as he could through the door. With the best flick he could manage, his magic turban extended and flew. It sailed through the air and tied itself near the top of the closest tree.
"Here is where I need your help. We need to pull my turban back so the tree bends. Once we get it far enough, we'll tie this end of the turban to the door. Then the door should be ripped out as the tree goes back to normal."
Dadbad's men quickly hopped up and began pulling, but Atina's crew sat in disbelief.
How could this turban withstand that amount of pressure?
They thought. Eventually they remembered their captain's life was on the line and began pulling. Through a lot of effort, they bent the tree far enough, and carefully one of them began tying the end of the turban to the door, as the rest held back the weight of the tree. Once secure, Dadbad said,
"Everyone, stand back. Once I release my turban, this door will go flying."
They all walked to the back of the cell, hoping for the best. Dadbad carefully released his turban, making sure he wasn't caught in the door. Once he released it, the door vanished. The tree had snapped back up so quickly that the door was flung away. They stood in the cell for a second, surprised that it actually worked. Dadbad's plan had worked. They were free. As Dadbad stepped out of the cell, he held up his hand, and his turban untied itself from the tree and flew right into his hand. He turned back to the rest of them and said,
"Let's go and rescue Athena."
As quickly and silently as they could, the group made their way to the far side of the village, where they heard chanting and drumming. In front of them was a large pit in the ground that looked like an arena. A few large steps led down to the middle, where Athena lay tied to a stone table. There were 4 guards within spear length of the middle, and 1 man dressed in long flowing robes woven with seashells. This man walked around the stone table, yelling and chanting in an unknown language. He held a ceremonial knife in his hand and motioned aggressively to the sky, the land, the people, and lastly, to Athena. When he motioned to Athena, the drumming and chanting stopped. Dadbad quickly grabbed everyone and said,
"We need a distraction now. Get as many people as you can to chase you, and I'll rescue Athena."
Hearing the urgency of his voice, the 13 of them picked up sticks and stones and jumped out of the bushes. They screamed as loud as they could, throwing anything around them. Paralyzed for a second with shock, the man in the middle shouted something, and half of the people there charged towards the sailors. Figuring this was the best they could do, the crew members turned and ran back through the village, now being chased by about 100 angry locals. But this distraction gave Dadbad the opportunity to jump into the pit. While everyone was busy looking at the escaped prisoners, Dadbad ran down the giant steps, stole a spear from one of the guards, and effortlessly cut the rope binding Athena. "I was wondering when you would come," Athena said, sounding annoyed that it took them so long.
"Well, it's not easy breaking out of prison and sneaking through a village unseen,"
Dadbad said with a chuckle.
"Hold on tight."
Athena grabbed on as Dadbad threw his turban onto a tree and flew through the air out of the pit. For a second time, the indigenous tribe was shocked by what they had witnessed. Not only had these people escaped prison, but now they were flying through the air. Dadbad hit the ground running, but Athena had never flown through the air like this. and hit the ground like a rock, face first. She struggled to her feet as Dadbad ran back and grabbed her hand. Half guiding her and half pulling her, they ran through the village and into the dense forest in the direction of the ship. They ran at a full sprint for a long while before Adhina had to slow down for a second. "Come on!" Dadbad screamed. "We have to keep moving before they catch us again." "My legs can't take this. They need a break." She turned around and saw a large group of people chasing after them, brandishing bows and spears. "On second thought, maybe I can go on a little bit longer." Before long, the dense forest parted, and they saw a glimpse of the ocean ahead. They were so close now. All they had to do was find the boat, get on it, and they would be free. Suddenly, Dadbad stopped in his tracks, and Adhina almost ran into his back. She looked ahead and saw a group of about 100 locals standing in their way. Dadbad grabbed her hand again and led them to the right. They ran parallel with the beach, trying to outrun the locals so they could get to shore. But no matter how fast or far they ran, someone always blocked their path to the beach. Eventually, they saw the ship sitting in the water. All the dinghies that were on shore had been taken by the earlier group, leaving Dadbad and Adhina stranded. Their only option was to swim. But without getting to the water, there was no chance. Plus, even if they could get there, the locals would be on them before they got to the deep water. That option would lead to their death. Dadbad stopped and looked at the trees around. Sprinting around, he flung his turban and it latched near the top of one of the trees. "Help me pull!" he screamed. Without knowing the plan, Sheep helped grab his turban and bent the tree towards them. "Hold on tight!" he yelled, grabbing a hold of her waist. Suddenly, they were in the air again, except this time, they were flying towards the ship. Looking back, she saw the locals throwing spears and shooting arrows, but they were moving too quickly to hit. Then she turned her attention back to the ship and found they were coming in fast. She freaked out and grabbed tightly to Dadbad. The other end of Dadbad's turban came back to his hand, and he flung it around the mast. Once latched, they spiraled down, slowing with each revolution. At the end, they landed softly on their feet, dizzy but alive. "That's quite the entrance and entourage," Jibei said, chuckling as he walked down to them. "Thankfully, your new friends there can't hit us with their spears or arrows, but we should still prepare to depart." Jibei turned to the crew on deck and began barking orders. The crew ran around, preparing the ship to sail. Before long, the rest of the men who had distracted the locals climbed up on the ship and began helping to prepare for departure. The sails were unfurled and the anchor was raised, and a few minutes later, the island was disappearing over the horizon. Adhina and her 3 men stood against the rail, staring out at the open ocean. Dadbad walked up next to her and leaned on the rail, not saying a word. "Thank you for saving us," Adhina said, not taking her eyes off the sea. "I thought for sure we were going to die in that village." "You're welcome," Dadbad said, unsure what to say next. Eventually he asked, "What will you do now?" "We're headed for Shona to offload our cargo. We can drop you off there, or if you want, you can come to Bari with us." "I'm not sure. I've always been on the sea. Without a crew or ship, I don't know what to do with myself." "You could join us," Dadbad suggested. Adhina turned her head and stared Dadbad in his eyes. "You aren't joking, are you?" "Of course not. I manage a company that owns a fleet of ships traveling throughout the world. I can tell the 4 of you have done your fair share of sailing, and we could really use experienced sailors such as yourselves." "What do we get out of it?" Adhina asked hesitantly. "Well, I would give you a ship and a new crew to captain. You would have consistent work and get paid a fair wage, and you would be able to enjoy the open seas. Pretty good deal if you ask me." "You drive a hard bargain, but I think we can make that work. But only if these guys are on my crew." She pointed to her crew members. I wouldn't have it any other way. I guess that means you'll be sailing back to Bari with us. I hope you're ready for a long journey."
A few months later, Dadbad stood in front of the Sultan again, talking about his journey to Shona.
"It sounds like an exciting journey. You will have to come and tell me the full story another time, because I have need of your services again. This letter is of the utmost importance, and it needs to go to Queen Kiyu in Muz as soon as possible. I trust you have a fast ship."
"Yes, Your Majesty. I have the perfect ship and crew to take this letter. I will see that they set sail today." Dadbad took the letter and bowed, slowly exiting the throne room. Down the docks, he found the exact ship he was looking for. A brand new ship ready for its first voyage. As he approached, a woman called out from the ship.
"To what do I owe this pleasure?"
Atina joked. "I have your first assignment, straight from the Sultan." Thanks for listening to this very special episode of The Voice of Adventure. This will be my last episode for a while. My original goal with this podcast was to help improve my writing and let me practice with different ideas and themes that I wouldn't be able to explore as quickly in a novel. And with a total of 26 stories, I believe I've completed my objective. So this will be goodbye for a while. See you in a future story.